All right, now let's take our list view to the next level. So if I put my finger here and drag it to the left, we see two items here. This is what we call context actions. So let me show you how to add two context actions here, call and delete. So in our XAML file, first of all, I'm going to add the ending tag for text cell. Now we're going to use property element syntax to initialize one of the properties of text cell. So text cell dot context actions. Now unfortunately, IntelliSense in Xamarin Studio is not picking up this property, but it doesn't matter. Now inside this element, we can add one or more menu items. So menu item, set the text to call, and clicked event to this handler. Now I'm going to rename this method to call _ clicked. Unfortunately, in Xamarin Studio, rename refactoring does not work the way I expect. But if you're using Visual Studio, you should press F2 to rename this method, and that would automatically update the reference here. But in this case, I have to do it manually. So call _ clicked. Now I'm going to duplicate this line, add another menu item. I'm going to call this delete. And then I'm going to create a new event handler, handle clicked. Again, I'm going to manually rename this to delete _ clicked. And one more time in the XAML. Now for this menu item, I also want to set another property is destructive to true. And that would make this item appear red. So this is how we define context actions in XAML. Now in this case, I'm using a text cell, but if you're using an image cell or a custom view cell, the step is exactly the same. Now let's go ahead and implement the event handlers. I'm going to start with call _ clicked. Now look at the signature of this method. Unlike the selected event, our event args here does not carry any information about the current item. So how do we get a reference to that item? Well, here we have sender, which is actually a menu item because that's the item that triggers this event. So we can cast this to menu item. And now we have a menu item object. Now, how do we get from a menu item to a contact? Well, this menu item has a property called command parameter. In XAML, we can bind this parameter to a contact object, and then we can access it here. So back in XAML, I'm going to set command parameter to a binding expression. Now, what property of the contact should I bind this property to? We can bind it to name, ID, potentially, but why not bind it to the whole contact object? This way we have access to all properties. So for that, we use a special syntax. We use a period, which refers to the current contact object, which is the binding context for each item. Now again, for the other menu item, I'm going to use command parameter and set this to binding period. Okay. Now back in the code behind. So we have the command parameter and we can cast this to a contact. Now for simplicity, I'm just going to display an alert. So display alert, call. I'm going to display contact.name and an OK button. Let's test the application. So I'm going to drag this to the left, call. Okay, we got John here. Beautiful. Now let's work on delete. So similarly, in the delete handler, I'm going to use command parameter to get access to the contact object. But I'm going to do all this casting in one line. So contact is sender as menu item dot command parameter as contact. It's cleaner. Now I want to remove this contact from the list. Let's scroll down. So this item source property of the list view, let's have a look at its type. It's an IEnumerable, which is the interface implemented by almost all collections. Now, IEnumerable is a very lightweight interface. It only allows us to iterate a collection. So it doesn't have methods to add or remove an object from a collection. So how should we remove a contact from our list? Well, I'm going to declare a private field of type list of contact and call this underline contacts. Now back in the constructor, instead of directly setting item source, first I'm going to set contacts field and then set list view that item source to contacts. Now in our delete handler, we also have access to this contacts field. So I can come here and type contacts.remove contact. Okay, let's run the application and see what happens. So I'm going to drag this to the left, delete, but John is still there. So what's happening here? If you debug this application, after this line is executed, you will see that the contact is actually removed from our list. So the object in memory is updated. But the problem we have is that our list view is unaware of this. Because when we remove an object from a list, it does not fire an event and notify other objects about this removal. To solve this problem, we need to use a special collection type called observable collection. So I'm going to change this list to observable collection. Let's resolve the namespace. So this class is defined in system.collections.objectModel. Now, when we add an object to this collection or remove an object from it, it will fire an event and this will notify any subscribers interested in this event. Now, the list view class in Xamarin Forms is able to work with this observable collection. We don't have to write any code for it. It's actually built into the framework. So if we use an observable collection under the hood, list view will be notified and it will refresh itself. So we just need to change one more line. Here, when initializing the contacts field, we need to set this to an observable collection. Let's run the application. Okay, let's drag this to the left, delete. Beautiful. Next, I'm going to show you how to refresh a list by pulling it down.